last panel is Marisa. Marisa is teaching at the College and is a visiting scholar at the UC Berkeley. She's a cultural anthropologist and she worked for some time
I know it is.
at the Immanent mine in Mongolia. So her paper is about Ovoos and all practices of Immanent miners, ethic, belonging, and generation.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that was, I think, a wonderful mini introduction to my talk. So yeah, I'm speaking about a city in northern Mongolia. It's one of the second cities to the capital. And there is a very, very large mine there. So I start with this image to give you a sense of how large the mine is and how large the city is. Okay. This is an image from Google Earth. I don't know how well this is coming out from where you can see, but so this is the open pit of the mine. So that photograph was taken from here, looking at the city, which is here. That other gigantic mass is the tailings pond. So that is where the mine, what is left over from the ore that is not the desired metal, precious metals, goes into that pit. The water is recycled for the mining processes, but you have a very large deposit of tailings, they're called. And these can be repurposed into other things, so I hesitate to call them waste, but that's what you're looking at. So this place has a variety of Ovoos. There are a variety of different groups of people working here. This city was established in the 1970s with the Soviet Union, and between the Soviet Union and the Mongolian People's Republic. And I conducted fieldwork there mostly in 2011 and 2012, and I also visited in 2016. So I'm basing this on anthropological fieldwork with people who are employed at the mine. Okay, so I want to talk about three particular sets of Ovoo, and I'm very interested in how these different Ovoos interrelate with one another and other landmarks here, and the mine itself, of course, as well. So I'll say more about that in a minute, but I just want to show you on the map. So there's an Ovoo here, which is associated with the mining enterprise. And by the way, the mine and the mountain where the mine are both known as Erdenetin Ovoo, or Ovoo. I don't really want to quibble about the pronunciation of the word right now, but anyway, you get the idea. And I'll just say also, Erden is a term related, of course, to the Sanskrit Ratna, this precious substances, treasure. So there's an Ovoo there. I will show you some photographs and etc. of it. It's on the slope of the mine mountain Ovoo. Then there is this one, which is on the other side of the city, which is the site both of a Soviet Mongolian friendship monument, as well as several different Ovoo actually, and this is one of these kind of multi-leveled mountains. And finally, I will show you here these on another slope facing. So the city is in a valley. It might not be too obvious from this photograph, but on the other side of the valley there are what people have called Nutkin Ovoo to me, and these are apparently I have been told that these are associated with people from various provinces. So the people who came here in the 1970s, they moved from other places in Mongolia. They're affiliated with various ethnic groups that are, for the most part, not the majority Halk ethnic group. Okay, so these Ovoo are involved in processes of both, kind of uniting everyone as part of this new city, and this processes of what Bernard was talking about of, how do you actually settle in a new place, but also that you also are retaining connected to your old places, and there are divides going on. So how do you manage these relations? Okay, so this is the first Ovoo I want to discuss, and this is a zoom in of the Google Earth. You can't really see much from this, but there is, if you can see my marker, nope, it's on slideshow view. You can actually see the mining Ovoo, which has a sort of very stupa-like form. You can see there's like a fenced enclosure there. And then this is the mine, and this is one of the ore processing factories. Okay. So this is an image of that official sort of mining corporation Ovoo. This is a pop singer. Interestingly, it has that terraced that terraced form, and it has an offering niche. So others have sort of spoken about those. I don't know too much about why it was built that way, but something that could be looked into more. So I'm also using these music videos as a source here, and also documentaries that are produced by the mining corporation and other people associated with the city. So something that always appears in these videos, and I think I can give, at this point, probably 10 distinct examples. They always show these explosions that are part of the mining process and that are done regularly at the same time. I don't remember the exact time off the top of my head. I have it in my notes, but it's the same, it's like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. It's a certain hour every Friday, regularly. And if you're in the city, because your windows will shake, at least if you're in sort of some parts of the city. And this is something I did experience, and my coworkers told me about this, and when they speak of it, they're actually quite proud of it, and like, oh, this is something we always want to show important visitors to the mine. And I've seen also, on YouTube and Facebook, I've seen circulations of, oh, this is us showing so-and-so important person the explosions. So these aren't spoken of as something necessarily that to be ashamed of, or, oh, we have to be mining here, but it's bad. Although in other contexts, people do say those things. So anyway, so what's going on with these explosions? And what I'm suggesting is that these explosions are also a kind of offering part of these Ovoo processes. So some of the music videos give us a clue to this. Here is one of the music videos that is sort of bookended by people going up to the official Ovoo and as a family unit. But the interior part of this music video shows people doing mining labor, including setting the explosive fuses. But when the actual explosion happens, it's actually very dangerous. We're shown that an accident may have happened to a family member, and someone is at home and takes a phone call and is panicking, basically. But it ends up being okay. So there's something transgressive going on, but that's related to where the fortune comes from, if that makes sense. But I think, I also do think that the explosions have something to do with particularly the recent book, Monastery in Time by Humphrey and Hurlbut Ujed, where they speak about the scattering of, for instance, prayer flags. This is an important part of the beckoning fortune aspect. So I think the explosions have something to do with that as well. And usually, so this video where there's almost an accident, or there may have been an accident, is quite unusual. Usually the explosions are shown, and then there are like bulldozers immediately scooping up the wealth. Okay, so some other kind of suggestions about the mine itself being a point of where the fortune is beckoned. So this is the second site. Sorry for I don't think these are super helpful, these Google Maps, but so this is part of this site. And by the way, that Ovoo, as long as I'm properly remembering, in 2016 was just gone without a trace. Yeah. This is behind the Soviet Friendship Monument. So I went there, so that Ovoo was this Ovoo here. So this is a Tsagaan practice that's very common in contemporary Mongolia. People go the first day of Tsagaan and they want to be there at the moment of sunrise, and they basically all sort of raise their hands at the same time and let out a cry and call for fortune. And we're not looking at this as a projected image on a screen, you can maybe make out that there are people on the very top of the Ovoo as well. And I'm assuming that those are, I'm pretty sure those were men. So I was here and I, participated in some aspect of this. So this is directly across from the mine, and the sun comes up basically over the mine, which is interesting. So that little kind of flat-topped mound there is a pile of non-ore rock, which the miners also refer to as an ovoo, but apparently in a non-sort of ritualistic sense. So you're looking at the sun coming up over the mine from that, from here. And so here are some people also making a libation, a scattering of milk product to the sun and to the mine, which I think is significant. And this mountain is really interesting because it's sort of a monumental complex. There are also herrigsurs there, which are these very Bronze Age, etc., circles of stone. And recently there has been a colossal Buddha built there that has had some issues. It was erected, and then you can see clearly that this has got some welding problems, and they took it down and rebuilt it. So the third kind of Ovoo. So not everyone is sort of contesting the same space, though, right? We have people setting up other sorts of Ovoo that are also kind of even covert. So if this is again not super apparent, but this is that slope across on the other side of the city, but next to the mine. There are some structures, particularly up there, you can see, and then there's like another one there. Those are Ovoo. And I didn't know about these until someone pointed them out. So the folks that pointed them out to me were primarily people from Dorvud and some people from Govaltai. And I gave a presentation about the Ovoo that are kind of visible that everyone knows about on the internet, and they said, oh, but we have these other Ovoo that we built. And I was speaking with Bernard, and some of these people are also from the same group that he works with, and I think it was the other group of people who decided, who told me that they had actually moved stones from their nutug, and it was not from their Ovoo, but it was other stones from their place, and built an Ovoo with that. So, and those I think are also cited in a particular place that they are in a relationship with these other sites in the environs. So to make a quick conclusion with some another theoretical point besides, of course, the work of Hurlbutler and Humphrey about scattering, I think there's also something going on here where the mining is not there's of course a lot of work about how mining is something very new to Mongolia. It's something that's being imposed from outside, that's disrupting a lot of relations. But and so there's a reading of a lot of these kind of rituals. For instance, the supine demonist text has been positioned as having some kind of environmental import, and there are actually mines apparently on that map. So I was also using the work of anthropologist Martin Mills, who points out that there are mines on that map, but the Ovoo or the stupa, the things between on this fuzzy line, are actually also positioned to be bringing out the wealth. And this is also an important point that has been made at our workshop, but also by Humphrey and Hurlbutler about these landmarks are not so much about always suppressing things. It's about relating with them. And that can be a relating of sort of deflecting, I think in the case of the Nutkinovo, there is some kind of like, yes, we are taking some of this away from other locals and projecting it back to where we came from. So yeah, I think that there's some further work to be done here, but yeah, the complex of Ovoo and how they're actually in relation to one another is, I think, really important here. And I think that's all I will say for now. So thank you very much.
I really encourage everybody to watch this fantastic propagandistic song
oh yeah,
on YouTube. It's really extraordinary. And it's Japan, who is also
Japan.
deputy.
Yes, who is a member of parliament,
etc.
Yes.
And he's wearing this typical reinvented medieval robe. And it's always very important to be dressed in them. But he's always wearing a belt.
Yes.
And the hat. And the hat.
Yes.
So-called medieval hat. So thank you very much. Now I have a pleasure to introduce Gaëlle Lacaze, who is professor at Paris Sorbonne University. And she's an anthropologist in the Department of Geography.
Did you upload?
She published a book on the techniques of the body in Mongolia a few years ago.
You sent it via email to Carolina.
Among the Mongols and the Kazakhs and cross-border traders and gender issues in Mongolia. Her present-day topic is about worshipping mind.
Okay, we already explained how that there is multiple kinds of Ovoo and their shapes, their places change in space and in time, and this question of the changing of the frame and the places of Ovoo was really interested me because I saw these changes since the early 90s when I came for the first time in Mongolia and till today. And even there were many analyses about Ovoo, about textual analysis of sutra used during the ceremonies, and really detailed description of the rituals, and examination of different type of Ovoo which existed. But I wanted to make the analysis of the changes we can see on the 20th and the 21st centuries on the shape and frame of this of Mongolian Ovoos. Okay, many scholars analyzes the roles of the Ovoo and the political environment where we can see ideological role of Ovoos and relationship between Ovoo and Buddhism, and the function related to Nudgi Edzin, the feeling of being one part of the homeland, and for me the in particular importance was to make the analysis of political changes from the beginning of the 20th century and till today, where when Mongolia is characterized by mining boom, and to analyze the tension which come from this sacred landscape and the mining, prospection, and exploitation. Okay, we are. There is a very deep influence of Buddhism on the Ovoo history and also today, but today the things are more complex than only Buddhization of the Ovoo and Ovoo rituals. And we can find many kind of Ovoo near to the mountain, the spring, the roads. There is near to special trees or special stones, or there is many kinds of places to build an Ovoo. And the meaning is to say, okay, this is a sacred land, and we are here to mark this sacred land. Okay, and when I began to come to Mongolia, there was only, it was in early 90s, and the most important Ovoo were the street roads Ovoo, which also drivers Ovoo. And it was important Ovoo because everybody, it was the beginning of freedom of movement, and everybody came to the road and make some offerings to the roads Ovoo. And it was the most important one. And it was really rare to see, you see, at the mountain, it was really rare at this time to see some mountain Ovoos visible, and it's not the case today, because today you can see many mountain Ovoo, and mountain Ovoo are well worshipped. And this is the mountain Ovoo near the UB, near the border of the UB area, the Ulaanbaatar area, and you can see the capital on the background. And yes, it's. No, it's all scarves. No, human. Okay, Isabel. It changes, but not. It changed, but not on this way. And this Ovoo, this Ovoo were erected almost on 2010, because near to this place was built some gear district, new gear district, which that means we needed to mark the border between UB area and other district area. And the second point is that we can build this Ovoo now, because there is some people to deposit offerings and make some worship and so on. As you see, there is many kind of offerings in this Ovoo. There is some kind of Buddhist offerings, and you see horse skulls, which is more close with people believing, and also medical stuff, and also just scarf like a hadak. And this is kind of show you how now the worship ritual are really some syncretism between shamanism, people believing, Buddhism, which is characterizing nowadays Mongolia. But it wasn't the case before. This is a road Ovoo in the 1997. You can see there is a horse skulls, and this milk pot who were used to make some meal, and but there wasn't pig of wooden pigs. We just began to appear during this period, which is the axis mundis, who we can find in other kind of like a Tibetan Ovoo. And but why there isn't such kind of wooden stick? It because the Ovoo became again to be rebuilt, and while there was forbidden during 70 years of socialist administration. And The other change was after the apparition and multiplication of these wooden pigs was the offerings of Hadak, which is a blue scarf, and Hadak were multiplied year after year, and you saw some others with just full of Hadak, you can't see even the piece of stone. Okay, this is us for private and individual Ovoo worships rituals. But in 2003, the government decided to renew the state worship of Ovoos, and he just make a list of the sacred mountains we have to worshipping after we are authorized to worship again. And among this, this is about the skulls in Roadside, because this particular region doesn't have some sacred mountain, but all the forests were worshipping as a sacred place, and in the Roadside mountain in 1996 were worshipping some Ovoos, while in the other part of the Mongolia it wasn't the case. And also the Ovoo skulls were a new practicing like that, because before it was on the road Ovoo, but not on the mountain Ovoos, and not near the monasteries, and now you can see this kind of skulls near to any Ovoos. And as you can see, there is a spiritual renewing and of the cult of the Ovoos, but not only on the Ovoos. It's a global spiritual renewing of shamanism, of Buddhism, and of popular beliefs, which is reflecting in the Ovoo. And the last thing which is reflecting in the Ovoo is the conflict for lands, and especially between minings and the states, between minings and the worshipping mountain and the sacred mountain. And the most evident or the most clear example of this conflict is Altan Ovoo. Okay, is Altan Ovoo. Altan Ovoo is on the southeast part of Mongolia. It's a really worshipped and sacred mountain. And in the beginning of 2000, French uranium exploitation company get some license, or try to get some license to explore and further exploit uranium in this area. And in 2012, they get the license to exploit the uranium vein in this area. And in this 2012 year, the government decided to postpone the regularity of the Ovoo worships from 4 years to 5 years. And we don't know if Areva made some pressure on the government to postpone the regularity of the rituals, but there was a lot of problem with between Areva and local green activists who don't want let Areva exploit uranium vein near to the sacred mountain. And there is a lot of violent opposition in UB, but also in the countryside near to the Altan Ovoo. And at least we can, Areva has the license to exploit some of uranium vein among Altanovo, but the pressure of the population of green activists made Areva to be in the obligation to change his plans, and to exploit another vein of far from the sacred mountain. And which is not so good for Areva company because it costs much more money, and the vein, they think that the vein is less rich than the vein they wanted to exploit, but they was obliged to do that. Okay, to concluding, we can see that there is many changes since the beginning of the 20th century, where the Ovoo was forbidden, and today, where with evolution was in the shape, in the places of the Ovoo, on the visibility of Ovoo at the end of the 20th. During the 90s, the Ovoo were more visible and visible, and now they are everywhere. There is Ovoo when you want to mark something, like not only sacred mountain, but some worshipping place, some strange place, some place you have to respect because of the spirits and so on. And now the Ovoo, as we can see with Areva and local and governmental representatives, Areva Ovoo can be a pretext or an object to have political influence, to be in the heart of the conflicts, and now the Ovoo can be used as a sign, political sign, border signs, but also be used by the people in order to defend their own homeland. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Janet. So our next speaker is Jessica Matson-Biskatra from UC Santa Cruz, and she is a PhD candidate in cultural anthropology and one of the very few specialists of poetry.
Do you have yours in there? Sure, okay.
Or no, I have my... Jessica got her PhD dissertation about poetic relations with geological bodies and about poetic life mirrors. But now she will speak about the most important of the Dariganga in Remaking, so East Mongolia. She spent more than a year as a 2 or 3 years.
2 years, yeah.
3 years, first as a Peace Corps and then as a PhD student. And she will speak about the first title, Your Dream of the Mountain and the Mountain Dreams of You, Mongolian Geoethics and the Poetic Life of Altanovo.
This past summer, on the grassland steppe of Mongolia, near the eastern border with China, the Som district of Dedagang played host to the national Tatlak, offering a sacrifice, for the worshipped mountain Altanovo. Altanovo anchors the north end of the Dedagang Notak, a lush volcanic grassland situated in the southeast of Sukbara province. It is the ancestral home of the Dedagang sub-ethnic group and also contains the holy mountain Shiltimbogt, legendary horse thief and hero Toreband, sacred Gank Lake and Orkatlin Botlak Spring, Neolithic stone men monuments, a yearly swan migration, and a smattering of lesser obos, ice caves, and sand dunes. This talk engages with the geosociality of Altanovo and Dedagang on 3 distinct but integrated levels. First, I will give a brief ethnographic recounting of the uncertainties that emerged during the 2018 National Tatlak at Altanovo. Second, I will draw on the work of Dedagang scholars and informal interviews with local worshippers to argue that, despite being natural rather than man-made, Altanovo has still undergone processes of Ovoo accretion. Third and finally, I will illustrate that this relation is characterized by acts of exchange, injury, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Anxieties around the health of this particular non-human relation are thus mirrored in currently emergent discourses about ecological degradation, restoration, and reparation in Deragang, particularly in the context of industrial mining. Altanawa's taklak began at dawn the morning of August 27, 2018. The previous night had seen the population of the Deragang Som Center explode, and a volunteer policeman I spoke to while he was directing traffic commented that it was, quote, basically the same as UB right now. The air was full of dust, and tents lined the grassy shores of Holtba and Gang lakes. That morning, the first stage of the taklak, dedicated to the sun and the reading of holy texts, was sparsely populated, but gained strength as the sun rose. The second stage of the taklak, to Altan Derayawa's divine kingdom of heaven. During this, Sukhbatar-born Prime Minister Hurul-Sukh joined the ritual, as well as the province governor, other local politicians, and soldiers carrying the white horsehair standards of Genghis Khan. The crowd listened to the lams read for half an hour or so before groups of men and women began to peel off to the right and left. The men started their climb up Toreban's path. I think you can kind of see them going up there, to the mandal at the summit, and the mandal is sort of a hybrid stupa form, as Isabel told me yesterday, that I'm going to have to look into later. At the summit, while us women began our clockwise circumambulations and conversation around the mountain. An older woman in a pollution air mask paused to watch the silhouettes of the men ascend in a line up the side of the mountain. "Isn't that nice to see?" she commented. Over the course of the 90 minutes it takes to circle the mountain, we passed each other a handful of times and made small talk. She paused occasionally on the path to pick up little pieces of trash. "All these tourists and their litter," she muttered. "We didn't used to have to do this. They're going to ruin the lake with all this trash." She sighed. "Ulaanbaatar people." She untangled a silvery choco pie wrapper from a patch of grass and followed the gesture by flinging a handful of millet as an offering to soothe the insult. That night, I went with my host to see the Nadam night concert. Walking along towards the stage that has been set up at the base of Altanawa, I heard the sound system before I saw it, piping out arcs of careening operatic voices that bounced off the mountain and blasted out into the darkening steppe. The concert for the first night of Nadam was to celebrate the success of the taklak work that had been done that morning. Politicians congratulated themselves and each other, and the night culminated in a performance by a dance troupe from the province's Jahansharak Theater, which reached its zenith when a group of male dancers pulled together in the center of the stage, clasping their hands, bowing their heads, and twisting their bodies together until they formed the recognizable curve of Altanawa, a human tableau against the grassy backdrop of the Awa itself, cloaked in darkness. The night closed with a public dance party to ABBA's greatest hits, held on the newly constructed concrete square at the foot of the mountain. That's what people are standing on there. I hung out on the edge of the revelry with Gana and Hotham, my hosts in Deragang, and their teenage children. "Do you think Altanawa likes ABBA?" I half-jokingly asked Hotham as she distributed shortluk among the small crowd. "Of course," she replied. "Altanawa loves music and people." The next morning, a thick, hot fog rolled into Deragang. Precipitation and heat are not uncommon during summer in Deragang, but they rarely come together. This was not a recognizable cold white fog, but thin, dingy brown, and stiflingly hot and sticky. Even stranger than the sudden presence of the fog was the absence of what it had replaced. Successful taklak, I was told, were always signaled by rain. Talk around town that began as mild disturbance only intensified as the heat increased and no rain came, even as it was promised and expected by drivers, shopkeepers, my hosts, and their visiting family. "It's going to rain tomorrow." No rain. "It will definitely rain by Friday." Still none. By the time I left Deragang, there was still no rain, and there wouldn't be for many weeks. So this is a painting of Altanovo by Deragang poet Dashvalbar, and it's in the Sukhbatar Central Museum. The power of Awa, from nationally worshipped mountains to simple public stone cairns, is formed out of their ability to harness power through the management and mediation of a web of connections that spin off from them, between the human and non-human actors they encounter, between realms of existence, between ancestors and descendants, and so on. This connective power is generated via the process of being and having been absent, or piled up. This refers to a process of accretion, by which energy, fortune, and value are collected, consolidated, and redistributed via a system of intensifying exchange in which the material is collected as stones, sand, wood, and so on, and the immaterial is redistributed as fortune, destiny, energy, value. Alta Novo's accretion is also volcanic, piled by the movement of energy and explosions as magma, and its cone formed and shaped by passing wind over the centuries. This volcanism is part of what distinguishes the Dergang Notek from the surrounding Gobi, as high levels of acidity from volcanic ash in the soil enable the growing of lush grasses and medicinal plants that have sustained pastoral herders and their horses for centuries. Alta Novo has also undergone a process of accretion through direct exchange and interaction with humans. In an essay entitled Mini Nesen Ek Oran, which I translate as either I Discovered My Motherland or My Discovered Motherland, Dergang poet Ochabartin Dashvalbar describes the mountain's origins. Quote, Alta Novo truly is a living mountain. People have loved and worshipped this mountain for centuries, and over many years, the thoughts of hundreds of thousands of people have become a single point, concentrated on this mountain. Saturated with everyone's faith and desire, it was thus transformed from a simple mountain into the love of the motherland. Well, my ancestors didn't worship this mountain in vain. This symbol of eternal love must come to us. It is Dergang's Alta Novo. This is how Awa trouble many of the distinctions through which cosmology is organized, between religion and its others, between secular and non-secular practice. It is true that Alta Novo is a tingr from Tamar Javin, but it can also be true that it has been enchanted through the accretion and concentration of desire, as Dashvalbar argues. While self-described religiosity varies widely among those who come to worship Alta Novo, the fact that they are worshippers remains. For this reason, I argue that engaging with Alta Novo through affect, while at the same time not denying cosmology, allows us a view for how people actually engage with the mountain in everyday practice. The primary mode at work in determining the place of humans in relation with Alta Novo is through an affective and sometimes emotional exchange and rapport. It has been argued that in Dergang, the Owo that signifies the material body of the mountain and the Owo that refers to the supernatural entity or tingr should be thought of as separate bodies or separate entities. However, among my lay interlocutors at least, the material mountain and its immaterial effects are fully integrated. Alta Novo is fully material, but it manages to sometimes behave in immaterial ways. Its multiple and overlapping cosmological affiliations coexist without conflict because it is first and foremost a mountain. Much like its human worshippers, it is comfortable with multiplicity, able to participate in both cosmology and politics without succumbing to the prison of belief or a dogmatic party affiliation. Alta Novo, like the public assembled in Dergang last summer, participates in the Taklak cosmopolitically as a non-human person, as David Sneath argues. However, I want to caution against the tendency of taking up only animism as a default explanation for non-human personhood in Mongolia. Instead, I suggest we look at the mountain's power to compel. Dashvalbar, who is nothing if not cosmopolitically attuned to the Dergang Notek, argued that the geological body of Alta Novo, quote, a simple mountain, was initially empowered with the potential to compel acts of worship through the focused power of generations of desiring human bodies. For my interlocutors, Alta Novo's effective power is tangible, often described as magnetic. Dawa Surun, an old friend and co-worker who lives in the Sukhbarayma capital of Baranurt, traces her family's relationship with Alta Novo back to before socialism, at least 4 generations. Her mother's ancestors, she explained to me, were once very poor, but nevertheless they sacrificed much of what little they had to the Owo. Over the years they became wealthy. Now she feels her destiny is likewise bound up in her relationship with Alta Novo, just as it is bound up with other networks of relation with persons who shape her life. The night before I set out for Dergang to see the Taklak, I asked Dawa if she could remember the first time she visited the mountain. She could. It was 2008 and she had just graduated university. She went to ask for her first job. Out of this memory spilled many more, and she lamented not being able to visit the last few years. Quote, Alta Novo is a very wishful mountain. It's so very magnetic. For example, I haven't visited Alta Novo for 3 years, since that time we went when I was pregnant. So now these latest days I have missed Alta Novo so much. I dreamed about Alta Novo, not every day, but maybe a single time once a week or once a month. I mentioned to you about my dream. That's very religious in Mongolia. If you dream about Alta Novo misses you and they call you. They call their children or that's what we think. And then I went to the monastery in autumn. Last autumn, I talked about these dreams to the lam. He's a good lam. And he said, you should visit Altanovo, or you should pray to Altanovo, and you should give away some nice things. You know, like dej and chikir. At least you should do this because Altanovo misses you, and that's the thing. That's the thing. At least you should do this. Dawa describes the pull of Altanovo as both an affective and a material magnetism, pulling in its children, both human and non-human. Horses are said to gain energy from the mountain and are brought up to the summit before big races. Likewise, the black volcanic rocks that scatter the land around the base of the mountain, if removed, only desire to return home and can bring bad luck to the person who removed them. Altanovo is known as a sultan, gentle, soft mountain, and usually doesn't demonstrate the wrathfulness of other subordinate mountain Obo in the province. The most salient example, which Bolter also mentioned, is Haltsanovo, which murdered 2 successive governors and burned down the Som's government building in 2012. It's difficult to imagine Altanovo ever becoming hilknik, or wrathful, with its children, which is why the lack of rain after the 2018 taklak was so broadly alarming. The affective pull between the Oba and its humans is more than religion, more than secularism. It is highly particularized, embodied, and affective. Many Sukbara residents, like Dawa, imagine their unfolding destinies as entangled with their personal history with Altanovo. Contained within every relationship is the possibility that things can fall apart. By the end of the Taklak Nadam, an uncanny element had transformed the atmosphere, both meteorological and discursive. Tired of sweating, I decided to skip the last day of Nadam horse races and instead head back to Bodø today early in order to spend some time visiting. Pulling into town around midnight, I first noticed the clear absence of humidity, and second, the familiar smell of Bodø at night, the edge of a rusty knife, the smell of processing ore that occasionally drifted over from the zinc mine upwind. Mountain Obo have always had the potential for retributive anger. The interpersonal nature of their relations with humans has allowed for a give and take process of injury and forgiveness, soothing and coaxing, to continue up until the present. The idea that things could really and truly break down forever is fairly recent and marks a new and pervasive anxiety that is more intense from the known uncertainties that are contained within the framework of religious cosmology or rules of relation with non-human persons. As the discourse of global climate change entered Deragang's community consciousness around the time they got the internet, so did the notion of total breakdown. The engine of the Anthropocene runs on a rending of long-established relations between humans and others, and its various structures of alienation, plantations, factories, industrial mines, go beyond the frame that once contained humankind's potential for sin. If relations between humans and landscape could be severed on a global scale, of course they could be severed in Deragang. As the poet Mindoyo writes, Altanovo is the world on a reduced scale. Thank you.
Our next speakers actually has 2 heads, Grégory de la Place and Laurent Legrand. Grégory is assistant professor at the Northern University in Paris and he's worked for years among the nomadic herders of the Ovoo province. He published a book on burial policy in the socialist period, L'invention des morts, and also worked on shamanism, hip-hop, and many other topics. And Laurent Legrand is assistant professor at Toulouse University. He's an ethnomusicologist. He also worked in Western Mongolia, but northwestern Mongolia, among the Dahat, and published his thesis a few years ago about the attachment to song and poetry. The Dahat, chanter, s'attacher et transmettre. So the title of the paper is Being Skilled, the virtue of accurately composing with the heterogeneity of the cosmos in Mongolia.
Thank you, Isabelle. All right. Okay, let me begin this paper by reminding you a slice of Mongolian political life. It happened more than 10 years ago, but it is still telling. In July 2008, just after the riots in Ulaanbaatar that follow allegation of electoral fraud, an explosive atmosphere held sway in the city. Military tanks took the streets. When the Nadam started, newspaper emphasized the high quality of the manly games. They described at length the flight of the arrow that the president shot in the opening ceremony and reported his wish be the state policy's Mergen, Turin bodlok Mergen bach boltroi. Mergen, that is wise or skillful, and we will come back on this term throughout the paper. Some journalists wrote that judging from the quality of the manly games held all over the country, Mongol people should enjoy an auspicious time until the next Nadam. This kind of assertion can be understood as an instrumental political reaction to the event, and no doubt it was. The key fact here is that even the political opposition, ablaze from the recent events, stood still and seemed to endorse this interpretation. Compared to atmosphere of the previous days, the change was palpable. In each camp, the purpose of this day was to lower the political temperature by focusing on the display of virtue and on the fortune it will bring to the entire community. As for us, this episode might open a new vista for understanding the impact of manly games on social life. But first and foremost, it allows us to ponder on the ability of key participants to take action and make the difference at crucial point of transition like Nadam and Ovoo rituals. We borrowed the notion of prominence from the work of the anthropologist Marilyn Strathern to focus on, quote, the attribute thanks to which a person stands out from the rest of the group. In a joint research we are launching, we aim to pin down the most important prominences in Mongolia. Being Mergen, skillful, is certainly one of them. In this short presentation, we focus on two ways of being Mergen. On the one hand, the archer. Mergen is the title awarded to the best archer. And on the other hand, the diviner, usually referred to as Mergenhun. We try to understand what it means to be Mergen. I will start by the archer. There is an intricate web of connections that link Ovoo, manly games, Eringoronadam, the Dalaga ritual, that is the beckoning of fortune, and the archery. I will not expand further on this web of connection due to time constraints, and also I should investigate deeper. But let me stress what attracted our attention at the beginning of our exploration of this topic. It was a praise to the archer, which was transcribed by Sampildendev, a Mongolian ethnographer, and it went like this. When you give the bow to draw to a virile man, heroic in wrestling, full of grace in his beckoning gesture, heroic in the battle, affectionate with his friend, skillful when he shoots his arrow, this bow has the title of Yellow Bow. The verse that has become a driving force to think more deeply about prominence was full of grace in his beckoning gesture. Talagan Hishikte. Does it mean that other people who are less skillful aren't full of grace in their becoming of fortune at the Ovoo rituals or elsewhere? Let me turn briefly to my ethnography and focus on one particular episode that points to the foundation of this prominence. The data that support our argument comes from a fieldwork conducted in Ulaanbaatar in the summer of 2015 during the preparation of the yearly Nadam. When I reported to a very famous female archer the usual interpretation that archery is on the wane because of the increasing feminization of the practice, she scolded me for giving idiot words too much importance. Archery, she argued, was not a matter of strength, but rather a matter of fitting things together. And she used a Mongolian verb, evlulich, to express this. And it could be translated, according to Bowden, as to fit together, to assemble, to piece together. From past research on music, I knew very well the stem which serves as the foundation for the building of the verb, and this stem is er, means peace, concord, amity. In the course of my PhD research, I had learned the high value of concord in the moral life of the Mongols from another saying often referred to by people when they spoke about Mongolian pre-revolutionary astounding singer. People said that those singers achieved the 9 manly skills, the highest of which is precisely concord, Eve. My conversation with the female archer was interrupted by the restarting of the tournament. So I was left wondering what was the things that should be fit together in order to be Mergen. I will try to answer after having taken a closer look to an archery tournament. The specificity of Mongolian bows is a source of pride among the archers. All the materials that are used in the making of a bow are described as having a natural origin or as being in strong connection with nature. I will not expand further on the fabrication process of this kind of multi-layered composite bow, which is itself an assemblage between 2 different species of trees, horses' tendons, glue ideally made from animal leather, animal bones, and today fishing wire to strengthen the solidity of the assemblage and to maximize the strength of the bow. The crucial point here is the sensitivity of the bow to any variation in temperature, humidity, and air pressure. Even the amount of sunlight might increase the draw weight and therefore the way the bow should be handled. Archers have to feel the influence of these fluctuating conditions and adapt their sight. Other forces must be taken into account: the blowing of the wind as well as the coming of the rain and the peak intensity of those climatic episodes. The list composing this assemblage of technical and environmental conditions is endless. In an archery tournament that lasts for hours, each archer must shoot 40 arrows from a distance of 75 meters for men and 65 for women. In each round of the tournament, archers enter the game facing 3 other opponents and shoot their first arrow before they have to wait for the other 3 to shoot their own. It means that there is always a delay between the shooting of arrows. After 4 arrows have been shot, the round ends and the archer makes room for another group. Between each round, the waiting period may last from a few minutes to hours, depending on the number of competing archers. These 2 kinds of hold periods are quite difficult to deal with. Archers must keep calm, and moreover, they have to rely on a kind of nerve and muscle memory in order to keep track of the right gesture. If their last arrow flied over the target or missed it, they will take some time to ponder about what should be corrected. Finally, let me mention the role of the referee. From time to time, archers become referees. They stand near the target and through a set of codified and elegant gestures, they indicate to the shooting archers where exactly their arrows have landed. Remember the distance of 75 meters that separates archers from their target. It is difficult to see clearly the flight course of one's arrow when one is standing at this distance. Lots of other things could have been emphasized, but this short description should suffice to understand what kind of forces, energies, inner state, or coded signs must be fit together in order to hit the target each time an archer has to shoot, not only once in a while. All these heterogeneous components must be felt and assembled, and from this particular assemblage, the right and efficient gesture must be enacted. To be Mergen means primarily to be good at shooting, but in colloquial language, the term also denotes cleverness, wisdom, sensitivity, and the ability to find the right words in any situation. Mergen is a form of cleverness rooted in experience, as the Mongolian linguist Sewell wrote in his comprehensive dictionary. What is the common ground that gives coherence to this rich semantic field? We propose that the general idea underlying this wide variety of uses points to a particular kind of agency that has to do with an ability to compose with the complexity of a given situation. The archer, as a Mergen person, is expected to acknowledge the heterogeneity of the elements composing a certain state of the world and to go along with it. And it is the very common ground that archers share with another prominent figure of Mergenness, so to speak, the diviner, and I will hand over to Gregory.
Thank you, Laurent. So, let me pick it up from here. So, building up on what Laurent has said, so obtaining fortune at an Ovoo, most of all during the seasonal rituals where archers intervene, rely on the skill of yet another prominent character, whom we could call the master of ceremony. This character makes sure everything goes right in the unfolding of the events, but also in its astrological configuration. Which prayers are told, who attends, to whom the offerings are addressed, how, and most crucially, when exactly the ceremony should take place. These tasks, figuring all this out, these tasks are often carried out by a Buddhist monk affiliated to a more or less local monastery, or more likely by several monks. But these tasks may also be shared between officiating lamas and more local diviners, or even, as Caroline Humphrey has described, among Daos, by elders, as Bakshi. Anyhow, what these people share, or are supposed to share, to varying degrees, is a skill. They are Mergen, skilled people. And there is a continuity between even the highest lama and the skillful elders. So they are skilled in the same way as archers, or rather their astrological or ceremonial skill is described with the same adjective Mergen as the archer. So let's try to explore further this parallel. And for this, let's explain very quickly and somehow generally what Mongolian astrology is about. For this, let's consider a manual of astrology collected by Antoine Mostart in the beginning of the 20th century and translated into English in 2008 by Brian Bauman. So, the cosmos that is depicted in this manual is a complicated one. The world of Mongolian Buddhist astrology is is made up of an intense heterogeneity of elements that are each imbued with a more or less compatible quality. It would be too complicated to describe it into details here, but you should picture a cosmology in which each individual is, at any given time, surrounded by the more or less clashing qualities of constellations above, the particular time it is, the configuration of the landscape, the matter items are made of, spirits more or less active in places or at a particular time, or the personal quality of other individuals with whom one might interact. So, people constantly have to circulate in this universe of heterogeneous qualities that are more or less clashing with you and with your own quality at any given time. Circulating safely into the cosmos in a fortunate way implies keeping in check the multiple and almost infinite possibilities and the almost infinite contradictions in a given environment at a given time. So, of course, This is very difficult, and not everyone is able to do it, even with such a manual as that translated by Bauman. So, two consequences. One, it is inevitable for lay people to make mistakes and become victims of a mismatch in their surroundings. So this is what reparations, dasal, are for. The day job of a monk or any recognized skilled person is to perform these small fixes in people's cosmological condition, to reposition, as it were, to reposition rightly people with their environment. Second consequence, there are moments, such as seasonal rituals, and there are places at Ovoo where they are performed, but there are moments, such as seasonal rituals, when it is crucial for the community to do the right thing, as it were. And this is why they need skilled people to oversee ritual operations. Skilled people know how to respond with a correct gesture to the complexity of an intensely heterogeneous situation. So you can see how indeed ritualists are similar in skill to archers. Their virtue is to know how to wrap up contradiction into efficacious harmony. The difference between them is interesting also. Diviners ensure fortune by preventing misfortune. They will perform the actions that ensure that the elements in the environment do not clash. They will say the words that ensure that spirits do not get angry. The archers are indeed unique because the effect of their skill is even more positive. They achieve fortune by offering the community an objectified, efficacious result. Their arrow, hitting the target multiple times, is a perfect image of a propitious combination. The way archers shoot is the way everybody wishes they would lead their life, turning heterogeneity into harmony and forcing fortune in their skillful gesture. Once again, not everybody can do it, but archers' gift to the community, when it matters more in time and places of transition, is to show that it is possible, thus to inspire humans into leading their life as skillfully as they can. And here we can come back to the opening vignette that Laurent has given. It's indeed to inspire people into leading their life in a skillful way is indeed a quality that is appreciated in leaders. And it's indeed very important that leaders are Mergen, and they are expected to be Mergen. But to do that, they indeed have to rely on the help of people that will also monitor the moments in transition where they have to officiate and give the example to the population. So the project we have with Laurent is to investigate these kind of prominences and to see how they play out in several exemplar people, such as leaders, and to try and figure out what leading in Mongolia might mean in times of post-socialist transition. Thank you very much.
From the Wolverine Foundation in Montana. She's the executive director of the Wolverine Foundation. She's a wildlife biologist and writer, and spent 2 years in Mongolia, and works on the climate sensitive mountain wildlife. Her talk now is entitled Ovoo and Human Nature Interaction, and she mostly worked in Ovoo from Guyana, like in Albenzo.
Okay, thank you. I know giving the last presentation of the day, I hope I'm able to sort of pull together some of these diverse elements to make maybe a little oval of the heterogeneity of the presentations that have preceded, and hopefully I will be Mergen enough for your satisfaction. I have to say that I feel a little bit out of place. I do not have any great theoretical insights, so I'm just going to show you some pictures and tell you some stories about Ovoo that I have encountered in my 18 years of work in Mongolia. So I'm actually a wildlife biologist. And what does it mean to be a wildlife biologist? What do I do? Well, I go to Mongolia and I work with 3 national parks in northern Mongolia. And most recently that's taken the form of setting up this ger inside the national park as a base camp and living there with a bunch of really brave students who go out to Mongolia with me for a semester and do wildlife research with me. Speaking of out of place, how many people here actually know what a wolverine is? 자, 되게 Mongol en français c'est un glouton. This animal, for our purposes, I could go on for many, many slides about wolverines, but for our purposes, all you need to know is that this is a big weasel and it lives in cold and mountainous environments, which leads me to Mongolia, where in order to study this elusive creature, I do things like this. I make a map, I drop some points on it, often with the help of somebody who is better at GIS than I am, and then we get to know the landscape by going and putting cameras on these points or by skiing across the landscape and picking up wolverine scat, which is a fancy word for poop, and extracting DNA. It is always fun, although sometimes it is what is known, according to my students, as type 2 fun. That is a scientific term for the kind of fun that is only fun after you are no longer in this situation. So part of what I do in Mongolia, of course, is to bring American scientists and American students into these encounters with Mongolian colleagues and the Mongolian landscape. And our most important partners in this endeavor are the park rangers in these 3 national parks where we work. And we do a lot of things where we sort of scientifically train the rangers to use instruments of science, like automatic cameras and GPS. And as we are roaming around on the landscape undertaking these scientific endeavors, we encounter a lot of Ovoo. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time consciously thinking about these structures, but I have certainly seen a lot more Ovoo in the mountains than I have seen wolverines, which probably in some ways means that I should have been thinking about them at least as much as I was thinking about these animals I was looking at. And it's really, really important in all of these situations with Mongolians, I've found, to do our interactions with these Ovoos correctly. And you can see here, this is the Ovoo at Tagnur, which is in the Darhad Valley, and my students are properly doing this circumambulation, and you can see the ranger is standing over there, either taking a picture of it or actually possibly filming it. And these pictures ended up in his monthly report to show what he had been doing and what he had accomplished during his month of work for the Park Service. So it's really important to get this stuff right. So out of 18 years of interacting with Ovoos as a conservation biologist, a wildlife biologist, a few of the important questions that come out are, what is this thing? What is an Ovoo? How do these Ovoo mediate human-nature relationships? And are Ovoo relevant to conservation? Because, of course, I'm a Western scientist, and I like to know that there is some kind of cause and effect, straight line thing that I can get out of something. So I want to know, what is the utility? I'm kind of joking about that. I don't actually want to know that in quite that clear way. But it's the kind of question that a lot of my colleagues ask or potentially would ask. And I'm going to talk briefly, hopefully, about 2 sites. One in Harhoran, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years. That's in central Mongolia. And the other site, of course, is the place I was just showing pictures of, which is the Darhad Valley in northern Mongolia. Of course, Harhoran is the site of Genghis Khan's capital city. It is a renowned spot in Mongolian history. It is also the site of a Buddhist monastery, the oldest extant Buddhist monastery in Mongolia, which is Erdenzo. And so there's a heavy Buddhist influence there. And of course, above town, there is an Ovoo. When I first came to this Ovoo in 2000, And unfortunately, this photo is from 2010, I think. I don't have a photo available of it as it was when I was first there. But when I first encountered this oval, it was completely covered in hatyks and prayer flags. And if you looked inside, it was also inside completely covered with hatyks and hung with ibex skulls, argali skulls, the head of a snow leopard, the pelt, not the skull, and lynx pelts and wolf pelts. And it was a place where clearly there was some kind of relationship going on between people, wildlife, the mountains. I asked a lot of questions about what this oval was and what was going on there, and my friends eventually got very exasperated with me and told me to stop overthinking it and said, you know, the kind of stories around ovals are very flexible, and if you keep asking us these very, very precise questions, you're just going to drive yourself crazy because there's no straightforward answer. But obviously, there was something happening between people and the mountains and wildlife here. When I returned to Mongolia, I left in 2002. When I came back in 2009, the Ovoo had kind of been stripped down, and part of that, I think, has to do with how frequently the offering ceremonies at this Ovoo were occurring. But all of the skulls, all of the pelts, and all of the wildlife parts have been removed. And in the meantime, the monks at Erdenzo had built this ecology temple, and it's facing up towards where the Ovoo is. You can almost see the Ovoo up on the peak up there. And this ecology temple was partially built at the inspiration of an American organization called the Tributary Fund, which has started bringing monks to my current hometown of Bozeman, Montana, to train them in environmental advocacy and scientific methods to boost Buddhist environmental ethics. And the monks, this sign down below is warning to people not to throw trash on the mountains or on the Ovoos because it will decrease your humor if you do that. This kind of mountains and clean up the Ovoos was current when I returned to Mongolia, and all of these pieces of wildlife had been stripped out of the Ovoo, which I think is relevant to some notion of Western conservation where certain things are appropriate and not appropriate, and that having wildlife parts is involved in your ritual life is not seen as having a conservation outcome, right? Because you're supposed to protect the wildlife. At the same time that the official Qinghai Ovoo had sort of been stripped of a lot of these qualities, a number of these smaller, more personal Ovoos had proliferated. And there's this one, and then there's another one on the hill above, which is a conical wooden structure with a lot of hatyks on it, no wildlife parts. This one was interesting to me because it is a rock pile in the shape of a swastika, and of course, tied to the middle of it, it's Genghis Khan's war banner, and then you have it tied to the middle of it, a wolverine pelt. And wolverines are described as this dogshin, which is this sort of like ferocious thing. And the war banner, of course, is kind of a dogshin thing too, right? It's an aggressive sort of quality to it. In Buddhist paintings, you have these nagtang, these black tankas that are kind of well known around Harhoran, which depict these very ferocious deities as well. And you have the Dogshin mountains themselves, the fierce mountains that you're sort of supposed to be very careful with interacting with. And this monument to me seems a repudiation of this idea of kind of separating humans and the mountains and the wildlife. This monument, to me, this was defined as wrong by the monks and also by the local shaman, but it seems to me a place where these things are reintegrated, right? And it's making a statement maybe about people and humans and the mountains coming back into one entity. So from this first sort of experience with Qinghai Ovoo, I want to draw out a few things that I think probably should be defined, and this is thanks to Laurent for his very Mergen ability to pull out of my somewhat heterogeneous paper some important questions. Baikal, as it's conceived in Mongolia, that word is closely related to the word to be. And I think it's quite different from how Westerners, and particularly conservationists, conceive of nature, right? Nature is something that's apart from humans, and for conservation biologists, it's something that needs to be protected. I think there's quite a different interpretation in Mongolia. And then tied to that, our conservation and protection ethic is very different from a social relationship with the natural world. And relevant to what Brian brought up, there's this movement in conservation biology now to try to be more respectful of indigenous ontologies by incorporating what we're referring to as traditional ecological knowledge into management, to try to place science on a more equal footing with the sort of knowledges that exist in these indigenous communities. I'm just going to call it science and science rather than science and traditional ecological knowledge, because I think traditional is a little bit fraught. So if we can think about Ovoos as a science of knowing the land, then another thing that happens in my work in Mongolia is an encounter of science and science, right? My science, the science that I bring, this ecological science and this attempt to know the landscape with this pre-existing science of knowing the landscape. So I'm going to tell a couple more stories. This is Lingdawa. This is the Ovoo at the entrance to the Darhad Valley. There is a central Ovoo there that's very large, and then on either side there are 6 additional Ovoos, and those are for your birth year. So when we stop here, I go around the central Ovoo, I make my offering, and then I go find the dragon, and I make my offering there. And I instruct my students very carefully to go and find their birth years, which we first have to calculate, and then they go and do their offerings. So that's one kind of Ovoo. It's quite formal, and everybody stops there. This is Lingdawa, which is a place where we ended up because we were trying to do some plant research. Obviously at completely the wrong time of the year. As you can see, there is a whole horde of approaching snowstorms. This is not the way to do plant research. Let's just leave it at that. That was definitely type 2 fun. And people have built their personal cairns there. And then just a few feet further back is the official Ovoo at this pass. And, it's quite a different form from what you see down on Lingdawa. This is a shot of the Tagnur Ovoo, which is actually up on that ridge behind us. I'm just going to tell this story very briefly because we had the weather was coming in. This was in the summer session, so everybody's in their hats and their jackets and everything. So it was pretty cold. We were really worried. It was windy. It was stormy. There were clouds coming in, and we had one scientist who was very insistent that the science was going to go forward the way he wanted the science to go forward, and. He was doing some things that were socially not acceptable in making his assertions about how this was going to happen. And so in doing that, he was causing quite a bit of friction with the rangers, and there were some issues. And to make a longer story shorter, we got up to this Ovoo, and my Mongolian co-instructor went up and consulted with the Ovoo and came down and called a meeting, and we sat down and we worked this issue out, but we had to discuss it in this very explicit way. And the weather cleared after we had that discussion, and the mountain had said, okay, now you guys have resolved your issue, and your scientific research can go forward, right? And to this day, my co-instructor and I, if I'm being honest, think that the fact that this happened at this Ovoo had something to do with why we were able to be successful. So. And then this is a very informal Ovoo that was built by one of the rangers. This is something that I've run into a few times. The rangers they each have an area of the park that they're assigned to patrol. And in this case, the ranger here built this personal Ovoo because he was really inspired by this beautiful spot. And it's just his personal Ovoo. He said there wasn't anything there before he was there. Timer. Okay. And he just said, I really wanted to mark the beauty of this spot and mark the kind of feeling that I had about this place. And he showed this to my students while I was not there, and they were really, excited and moved, and they felt like, oh, this is a place that they've been brought, and now they have a relationship with this place because they have seen this Ovoo and interacted with it, and they have a relationship with the person who built it. He is the ranger who was showing them around. There are all kinds of interesting creatures that show up at this site, from American students to elk to ibex, and this is a home for all of these guys, right? Well, maybe not for those guys, but it's a temporary resting spot at the very least. I want to bring up something going back to the idea of the social relationships between humans and nature, just to think about maybe, and this is just a kind of an instinct, that the Ovoo in some ways is like the hearth in the ger. And when you come into the ger, there are particular spatial arrangements and particular ways you're supposed to interact with the host. You're coming into a home, you're asking for food, you're asking for shelter, and you bring a gift to the host. You move around the ger clockwise. You don't circumambulate the ger, but you have those same sort of spatial relationships with the Ovoo, and I think there might be a parallel there between the kind of reciprocal relationships that exist between people in those situations. So, for example, if I go to Marissa's house, Marissa's ger, and accept hospitality from her, it's not just a hospitality thing, it's a reciprocity thing. I'm agreeing to give the same to her when she shows up at my house. And so in accepting the hospitality of the Ovoo and the Azen of that mountain and that location, you're also kind of agreeing to protect it, or to offer the same hospitality and the same respect and the same kind of relationship to it. And this is where I think if we're talking in strictly utilitarian terms, like what's the utility of Ovoo to conservation, this is one way that we could maybe think about it. Like there is a contract of protection and mutual support between humans and nature. And so for my many colleagues who have seen Ovoo stuff and said, my many American colleagues have said, oh, that's really funny that you believe in these superstitions, I would return, this is not superstition, this is a contract of obligation between people and nature, and I think in some ways it is a lot more profound than anything that we have in the US when we're talking about conservation. So I think these Ovoos are locations of reaffirming social contracts with non-human entities, whether those are wildlife or the mountain itself or some other force that exists that inheres in those sites. There are also places of science. There are places where you can go and talk about how you are going to do your generation of knowledge about the land and whether you're doing that right. There are places of interrelationship with between outsiders and insiders. We've seen that a lot in this conference too so far, that Ovoos are boundary markers, right? There are places where boundaries are maintained, but there are also places where boundaries can be managed and sort of different entities can be integrated. And I think if you're a Western scientist working in Mongolia, you have an obligation to be very aware of how that's happening. So, in conclusion, I would like to offer this picture, which I think incorporates, again, some of the disparate elements that we've been talking about. There's a little stupa on an Ovoo, and there is a vole, which is very strategically and very skillfully, Mergen, making off with the 3 pieces of arl that I offered to it. So, yeah, thank you very much.
For Gail and Rebecca, you guys touched on, skulls on Ovoo, and I remember I've seen some skulls on Ovoos, and it usually gives me like fear sentiment, a little bit afraid, So what is the relationship between Ovoo and skulls, and why are they different types of skulls in Ovoo?
Okay, for the Tang people, there is no the skulls are usually in the forest and not on the Ovoo. But since several years, herders used to give their preferred horses skulls to the Ovoo, like offerings to the staggering in order to make circulating some vital forces and also give the soul of these preferred horses to the giving back the soul to the nature. Soul. Yeah. And the soul to the nature in order to venerate and to give to the horses. Thank you for your work, and you was very useful for us, and thank you, and something.
And they are often race horses, skulls of race horses.
And also preferred horses.
Yeah, the Ovoo at Tang, there's a specific story that's associated with that, where the Manchu came to the Garhad to take tribute horses, I think, and the mountain shook and spooked the horses, so the horses ran away. And in return, people take their preferred horse skulls up there, after they slaughter the horses or after the horse dies. They'll take those horses' skulls up to Tamnur because it's an Ovoo for horses. So it does have to do, in my understanding, with the just honoring that Ovoo and also returning the horse to the Ovoo.
First, I'd like to say, I really liked this whole panel. I thought everyone did a really good job. So thank you for that. This question is for Rebecca and Jessica, though I suppose this could be open to many people. I'm going to pull something out of one piece out of each of your papers that struck me. And the reason that they struck me is, Rebecca, you mentioned this discussion that we had about in the workshop about Baiga, meaning a potential meaning or etymology of it being that which is. Of course, philosophically, we can also, something that would be defined as that which is, a word could be ontology. So in your talk, you mentioned the ger as a kind of analogy for the Ovoo. Jessica, in your talk, you mentioned Dutch Bulwer's analogy that Alton Ovoo is the world in miniature. So I'm really interested in these two things. I'm really interested in the scaling. I'm really interested in these discrete worlds at different levels in different places. I'm curious maybe as to whether there's a gender aspect with the ger often having a kind of feminine description and the high mountain or the wild place often having masculine description. If there's something that, I get that this is a bad and vague question, but I just would like for the two of you maybe to play with this a little bit, or see if you have any thoughts on these kinds of scalings.
Well, I'll say that the part in your talk where you mentioned that a wall could be analogous to a heart really felt right to me, because in the same Mongolia poem, novella, where he says that Alton Ovoo is the world in miniature, he also begins with this image of a stone at the back of his father's ger that is from Alton Ovoo, but also is Alton Ovoo. So, and there's a way in which he builds on that image throughout the novella in a way that the Deragang Lothuk is kind of like a ger, and Alton Ovoo is its altar stone. So there's this kind of, Alton Ovoo is this work of kind of collapsing and shrinking, and it does this space and time bending, I guess you could call it. Because also from the Dutch Bulwer poem, he talks about how this accretion of desire is a way for him to sort of engage with both his ancestors and his future descendants. So that's part of that. As for gender, I mean, I can see it in that it's not, like, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure, I could say alcohol itself is gendered. It's hard to say because of Tang, like Mongolia doesn't have a gendered pronoun, so it's hard to say what's saying. But space is gendered. So there's like a feminine area, and there's a masculine area, and you move around it in ways.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of Mongolians who refer to the mountains as home. Like, you know, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about the mountains? And it's, these conversations, I think it's important to contextualize, we're happening in English, right? So, you know, these are Mongolians who are fluent in English and have some exposure to the US and Western kind of thinking and are quite immersed in it, actually. But, you know, a lot of the Americans who are present, you know, would say things like, oh, it's like a place to recreate, or like protected area, or wilderness. But this idea of home came up quite frequently with Mongolians. And so there is this sort of transferability, and obviously there's an inherent scale in that too, right? Because the mountains are a lot larger than one's hair or one's home. So I think also, you know, I'm quite fascinated with the whole perspectivist sort of literature, and that deals with space and time and the kind of flippability of identities and ontologies too. As far as gender, this is something that was explicitly articulated to me in Harforan, was that, you know, the heart and the kind of spirits of the heart, insofar as we can call them spirits, are female concerns, and the mountains are masculine concerns. And so, I mean, that I think has to do with that gendered space. That said, obviously I'm a woman. I'm a total weirdo, I think, to some Mongolians because I work with carnivores, which is something that they find to be very strange. But I have never gotten any pushback on being at any of these sites from anybody. Yeah.
Also, something I didn't put in my actual talk was that part of this specific, one of this music videos I was talking about, the one with the, I showed the family at the Ovoo, although the quality wasn't so great, but most of the video does actually show men and women who are relatives working throughout the mining factory, and that's very important. Also in a lot of the other videos, and actually one thing that Mongolians who have been in the mining industry now for several generations find very strange about, or Western mining and the other way around too, is that this idea among Western miners that like mining is a very masculine activity is not the case at Mergen. So yeah, so I think that there's also something going on there.
There was the Narrated close to the ritual, which is many games, and many games are given to women.
Female actors.
Yes, female actors.
Yeah, excuse me. Just about the parallel between the Ovoo and the Ger. There's this one. Okay. There's also this term Edzen, master, because the master of the land, the Gazrin Edzen, is a parallel of the Edzen of the Ger, of the host. Men are considered to be hosts of the Gazrin and of the genius Loki. So we can also make this parallel between the Ovoo and the Ger. Bernard has a question. Yes. Yeah.
I have a question for Rebecca. It's not really a question, it's rather a commentary. First, I wanted to thank you because I'm so glad to see that I am not the only researcher working on animals and never seen. And I would have a comment on the idea of social contract between humans and non-humans, and the idea of negotiation. I'm not sure I really agree 100% with that, because it's a very kind of a legal vocabulary. And as far as I know, when you go to an Ovoo, it's not really an exchange. I mean, you hope it's going to be an exchange, but it's never definite in advance. You do an offering, and sometimes something comes, sometimes it doesn't come. You don't know where it comes, under what form it comes, and if it's going to come at all. So there is the idea of uncertainty in this. And there is also the idea of vegan. I remember when I was with my old lady, I asked her, what is vegan? And he would say, this mountain is vegan, this pasture is vegan. And after a while, I said, but what is not vegan? And he would say, maybe this, or maybe that. And actually, she didn't know really. And it's very difficult to see, to understand clearly what's vegan. There is at some point a margin, and it becomes blurry. And so I think this kind of blurriness is very important, because here, when we discussed about Ovoo, we had the idea of a defined space. It was clearly mentioned in the words on the maps, but there is also a buffer zone, as Isabel mentioned. But this buffer zone is not about space and an enclosure of space. I think it's a question of tension. It raises the question of how far you can get without me, how far you can get from a point without dying. And here the limit of the space is not a line. It's a tension between a point and an individual, which often takes place inside the body. In the sense that what happens, that you lose your vitality. So the limit of the space here is not a boundary, it's vitality. And I think that this notion of margin and what becomes unclear is also important to take into account in many relationships overall. Thank you.
This one should work.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think you're talking about a contract or reciprocal relations. I'm certainly not talking about like a legally binding contract in the same way that I could show up at Marissa's house and she might serve me like, spaghetti with meatballs knowing I'm a vegetarian, and that might cause some problems. Like, you don't know what you're going to get necessarily when you have these sort of social relationships with people either. So definitely, I 100% agree with you, it's not a legal contract thing. And I also similarly don't think that there are hard boundaries. I think this is a problem of the imprecision of, the English language, probably also French and also Mongolian. When I'm talking about boundaries, I think those things are kind of inherently permeable, and there are ways across them. It's definitely not a hard line. So I guess I'm just saying I agree with both of those observations. So thank you.
And it's kind of interesting when you say boundaries, because there's this kind of new way that the term boundary is used in kind of self-help literature, or like where you're putting up personal boundaries, like we were saying, Buryatia, this is how far I'll go for you, or this is how far you can go without me. So it's a flexible boundary, it's a negotiable boundary, and it's a boundary that, if crossed, may or may not break down the relationship. But I think primarily this sort of exchange is it's just as like you were saying, just as sort of contingent as a relation between persons, not necessarily human persons, but persons with unpredictable persons, uncertain persons, and persons with feelings, I guess you would say.
Problems managing emotions.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just kind of curious about this concept of Mergen that was introduced, and the maybe historical change of it. And I mean, obviously it starts with an archer and then it moves to these maybe ritual cosmological specialists. I was wondering if that could be also extended to, say, Western trained scientists, if they also express this same concept of Mergen. Or if you know, if there's a historical development to the word where it was once upon one field, but then it became appropriate for astrologers and astronomers.
Thank you very much. There is definitely a historical factor to how it's been understood in Mongolia, and one of the historical periods I've been most curious to look into to spot these changes is the socialist period and the introduction of skilled professional jobs. And one of the papers that I really wanted to look back at before the conference, I couldn't, and I think that a lot in it that could be interesting is a paper by Daniel Rosenberg, on leaders and leadership roles in collectives, and how you can harness different people's skills and in order for a collective farm to work efficiently was a big question, I think, in during the socialist period. I think it builds on pre-existing notions of what skill is and how we can work in a collectivity by being well-composed. As to how the notion of Mergen can work outside Mongolia, why not? Yeah. I mean, we are all...
I mean, for Mongolians themselves, would they consider Western scientists as...
Yeah.
Skilled in the same...
In my context, yes.
No, that they're skilled in the same sense that Hadra leaders...
The word is Mergen, you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clearly the same.
There's the same root. I think Mergen is a bit... You wouldn't say of an archer, of a good archer that is Mergen.
Yes. But it's clearly
even if it's also... I mean, it's not completely unrelated. But being Mergen is... I mean, what we argued was not only precise knowledge of your field, it was a general talent at composing heterogeneity. So I don't know, it would be interesting to see whether Mongolian people would call Mergen someone outside of the Mongolian context. I'm sure they would, but who would that be? I couldn't say. It's often used to qualify intelligent people and wise people. So I'm sure there are many wise people outside Mongolia that would be considered Mergen. Figures like Gandhi, or I'm sure it would be considered Mergen. But I couldn't say for sure. This is speculation. Thank you.
Academician.
Yeah, so that would be the one that comes to mind when you talk about scientists in a more like modern sense. And the ritual is always like, it's the same root, but it's never really quite, like, Mergen is something a bit more in depth. It's like something...
Oh yeah, they're different concepts. But
yeah, and the ritual is generally in the modern sense used as a skill. Like something, like, meditative can be categorized into different types of categories, like, what's a good word for it? Yeah, like different skill sets of profession. Yeah.
Like literally in my context, it's someone who has a degree, oftentimes. So it's like a sort of a translation of the Soviet Spetsovets.
Mergen is something a bit more, it's like wisdom of something.
Yeah, and actually when I look back at the title we gave to our paper, it shouldn't have been being skilled, because this is Mergen. We should have called it being skillful. Skillful and skilled.
Maybe it could be from the source and the result. Like as you say, it's the result. Among the species, there is someone who are more specialists than the other. They are recognized like professional specialists. And Mergen, maybe this wisdom is more...
Doesn't the two go together as a compound to refer to things that actually don't?
Can I make a comment?
physician was Mergen. And I thought for a while, and physician is more narrow in Mongolia. And I was wondering what was the difference between Mergen and narrated. And maybe the nature of the heterogeneity that the Mergen and the narrated put together, make it together. And in Mergen, this heterogeneity is less defined. The narrated, the two different components. Maybe, I don't know. I have to think that it's quite interesting to contrast those different kinds of different ways of putting things together.
Mr. Brian, I have an answer for you.
Actually, it's more on the Mergen. I should say. But like a skillful writer is in secret history of the Mongols, there's Ovoo Mergen, who has this ability to see. He understands all aspects. Nice sort of Mergen. I wanted to make a comment on this business of bagel, and to me this is a fundamental issue. So what I try to express is there's just a fundamental difference between science and modern science. And modern science is a faith-based thing, it's not science. And you can tell a scientific person from a modern science-based person, a faith-based person, from how they understand space and time. People who are of a faith-based tradition believe that space and time exist. They do not exist. Period. Bagel is without space or without time. It's just that which is. It's just that which is. In order to make something, you have to make space and time. So if in the story of Hansel and Gretel, when the wicked stepmother takes those kids out into the middle of the deep dark forest, she's not just depriving those kids of air or water or anything. She's depriving them of space and time, and they're going to die because they have no space and time. When they're at home inside their little house, there's space and time created for them, and they can move around freely. Someone has made a world for them to live in, a world of space and time. Without these points of reference, these things simply do not exist. They have to be made. And one of the things that brings space and time to nature are these points of reference, and all those serve this function. So they're absolutely instrumental in bringing some kind of order to this bagel, which has no form and is void. So that's my comment.
May I answer your question first? Did I hear it right? Did you say inch? Mergen inch? Or
No.
what did you say?
Narrated.
Narrated. Oh, okay, never mind. Well, okay, I thought you said Mergen inch, so I was gonna.
We were speaking about inch.
Okay. So I was gonna get back to you with the words that we use Mergen in different contexts. And I use the same examples that I used 2 days ago. So Mergen is used in different types of contexts, okay? So Gregory and Lawrence used it as putting on something back thought. That means made the state policy, help the country prosper, okay? And then another Mergen is used when we're playing shara, right? Or playing, you are hitting the target, you are hitting the point. Yeah, okay? And then another context we use is mostly the principle, the definition of Mergen means intellectual, very, very deep, and skillful. So the archery example will be perfect. So when you're asking, whether these meanings have changed over time, it did, but we just use it in different contexts. But the principle is still there, sharp, target, hitting the point, intellectual, very. Does that answer your question?
It does, I'm just thinking about the astrologer.
Sorry.
I have one question for Gregory and Laurent. Thank you again for your very thoughtful presentation. I'm kind of jealous. That's why I'm bothering you until the end of this conference. I'm wondering whether there is a gender issue in this skillful thing, because you mentioned the case of a woman hacker, and she's apparently able to piece things together. And I had in mind the way you tie your dress and the idea of the sash, because I remember an article by Humphrey who says a man has to wear a sash properly to tie it in the good direction, and wearing a sash properly is like to be one's own person, like you are tied together. But women don't have a sash, they are called busqui. And it refers to some kind of a body which is more open. And so I'm wondering whether this gender issue can apply in the way somebody can piece things together. I'm wondering also whether the attributes that make somebody Mergen can be transmitted from one generation to another, or is it only learned? Like in a Buddhist case, the idea of essentialist way of.
So I will answer the last question first. I want to stick to the definition that Mergen is not, it's quite different from Aries. You're born with Aries, and Mergen is something that is rooted in experience. It's something learned. An archer take many time to learn the skill. So it's a learning thing. And most of the Mergen who I know is male. Maybe it is my fault in my presentation that it was a female archer that gave me the key to the understanding of what is at stake in archery. But most of the male archers think like that too. So in archery, what is at stake is not the strength of the archer, but his ability to put things together.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I would think that these are issues. It's not really decided. The relationship between the way Mergen is or not an alias, or is something acquired or innate, is a complicated question, I think. Because in divination, for example, there are lines of Mergen tree. And if your father was Mergen, you might be one. It might be easier for you to develop that you get, and that's it. It's always needing experience, honing. It needs taking care of. But do you start from nothing? Is everybody as likely to become Mergen? I'm not sure. So I would say it's a mix of natural alias and hard work. And I'm not sure there is a simple answer to that. And the gender issue is really an issue. Because there are some women archers. For diviners, it's more complicated. Some women can be relied on to be Mergen if they are, for example, Utran, if they are shaman. Being shaman it's completely different. It's a completely different quality as a skill. being a shaman is embodying spirit and so on. It's not a question of being Mergen. But shamans might be also Mergen and might be relied on to find horses, for example, or to do divination. So it's definitely a provenance that can be embodied by women. And there are, in today's land battle, women leaders who are sought to be Mergen and looked up to be Mergen. But what's the relationship between being Mergen as a man and being Mergen as a woman? Can you do it the same way? What's the relationship of this with people? These are really difficult issues. It would need more fieldwork, basically, to what Mergen skillful leadership is in Mongolia today. I think it would be a fascinating question to explore.
Just one tiny point.
On the first question, it's not the same belt. Cosplay means without belt, but it doesn't mean without closest belt. It's not the same belt.
But just to come back to this idea of tide, can we associate the idea of piecing things together with the idea of unclosing them?
I'm not sure. I think it's really different thing. Because when you tie things together, you're not resolving any complexity. You are keeping things together, you see? It's, the set of things is constant. It's not a problem of which things are there and do they conflict. It's a matter of keeping things together. So it's a bit of a different matter. It's still important in order to be well positioned in the world. But it's a different matter, I would say, intuitively.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I have a translation of that again in our contemporary world. It would be artificial intelligence, computer.
Yes, that's I mean, is a computer Mergen by being able to solve an equation?
Maybe a manly thing.
Yes.
So should we take like one more question maybe, or I think we're at time, but we could maybe take one more. Stefan. Yes.
I'm kind of tempted, but maybe a little big question. So I'm not sure how much of the time can go. No, it's been a very, very inspiring panel, and so I'd like to connect some dots together, inspired both by Marisa's presentation and the fact that Ovoo sites could be also sites where extraction from mining could be also turned into a kind of positive force and not necessarily mining as something that is thought as controversial in relation to religious practices, and thinking about those Ovoo sites as nodes, in some ways less as points of transition as a type of worship, as more like anchors in the landscape where different kind of forces, vitality, whatever you want to name it, can be generated at some point at particular moments of time and particular location in space. So the articulation of space and time that Ryan just mentioned seems to be critical about that. And doing some kind of wild association, then that brings me to some of the very inspiring things that were said by both Gregory and Laurent about how could we think in parallel those Ovoo sites as nodes in the landscape, in a network of configuration where you can delimit the boundary of territory with people as nodes in a social landscape where some people more than others, because they are skillful, emerge from the mass of people and become leaders. So in some way, the leaders as parallel to part of the site that are powerful places, and those are powerful people. So is there a way that those two could be connected in some ways? Can we think of Mergen people as being, powerful in the sense that all those are powerful places? Maybe this is going too far, but that's the kind of connection I made.
I would say yes, and I think that is a wonderful wrap-up of some things I was trying to say. Oh, wait, real quickly, Martin Mills, I think, does a nice thing about the mind drawn loss. He says the wealth is emerging from the landscape because of the nodes being interconnected in a certain way. But, yeah.
I would also say yes. I think it's important to think of Ovoo as social beings in networks with humans, with non-humans, with animals, with spirits. And I think, sure, if an Ovoo can be powerful, can be Mergen, and a person can be Mergen, why not? I don't want to flatten, like I don't want to do the sort of ethical flattening that this sort of object-oriented ontology can sometimes do, but I do think that if we see them together in a social network that includes geology and includes other non-humans, then yes.
It's not only a question of war, but also of singularity.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think it's really relevant, and it relates also to Brian's point about genius, and Ovoos are powerful also as index of a genius that is always a skillful way of practicing landscape. And I think it's a good way of tying things together. The kind of power we wanted to look at, looking at Mergen, is Mongolian is elk, which is one of the possible words for power. But it's a power that is very much a diplomacy. And here it's a way also of going back to this cosmopolitics that all the papers have described around Ovoo. So yes, I think the notion of power as a way of tying up all this is really interesting and relevant.
Elk is also freedom, because you are powerful, singular, you are free to act in another way than common people. And one of my informants, you say you can't peace toward the river. But one day I was with my informant, which is a businessman or shaman. He's reading books and cure people, and he is considered as a powerful man in the valley. And we had drank 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles of vodka, and he went out of the boat, and I was drunk, and I was just follow him, and he went to the river and pitched into the river. And wow, I was like, wow. And when we came back to the yacht, I asked him, okay, everybody told me that we can't piss toward the river, even into the river. And he answered, everyone has the freedom of his own power.
He was drunk.
Vodka would do that.
Does anyone have any following comments or? No. Thank you very much.
So I really like to thank Carolee and to thank all